Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I am way overdue on a review for Too Many Bones. I'm gonna straight up bury the lead here. I love this game. In fact, it's in the title already that if I could only keep one game, well, ... because I'm not actually sure if Too Many Bones would be that game, but it is a strong contender. I'd have to really think about it. If I could only keep one game, it would be facing off against maybe Terraforming Mars. There are a handful of games that give me both a ton of content, play well solo, play well with other players. This is one of my favorite games of all time, and I'm long overdue for a review of it. Now, the reason I'm doing a review now, in case you're wondering, is if you're not already familiar, there is a GameFound campaign, launching on GameFound. Too Many Bones Unbreakable will be launching in a day or two, and I figured I'm long overdue for covering this one. I may as well do so now. And to be very clear, there's no content from Unbreakable in this video. This is about Too Many Bones. It's about Too Many Bones Undertow. It's about 40 Days in Dolores. Actually, really, I'm just going to focus on Too Many Bones. But I have everything you can have up to this date. I don't know if I have all the promos. I'm definitely missing the Baby Yoda promo, whatever it is. I have nearly everything, including this trove chest that gives you a ton of helpful ways of organizing all your content. These player trays are absolutely amazing, but understand, these things will cost you more money. In fact, everything here is not cheap. Nothing here is cheap at all. Let's dive into this, because you may be familiar with Too Many Bones already. You possibly are. Maybe you already have it, own it. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's on your list. It's an expensive game. It's an expensive investment of your gaming time. And I'll have timestamps down below in case you want to skip the general overview of the game, in case you already know all that. I'm not going to cover every little rule here, not by a long shot, but I will cover the general overview of the game before diving into my opinion, why I like this game so much, why it is one of my favorite games, why if I could only ever keep one game, it would be a strong contender for being that game. And Too Many Bones it's an adventure experience. It's a game that plays well solo, it plays well with 2 or 3, 4 pushes it just a notch, at least for myself. For me, the sweet spot's going to be one or two players. But it's a game that gives you an experience, an adventure, as you go through a series of days, a series of time, each time engaging in different types of encounters. You'll have encounters. You're going to draw from various cards. You'll have various static cards. You'll have boss cards. You'll have intro cards, special scenario, tons of different cards that all give you a little bit of a narrative flavor text, a little bit of a situation. You're lost in the woods. Arrows are raining down at your knees. You turn around. There are bandits behind you. What do? Do you rush them head on to deal with them, and you might have this kind of battle queue? Do you hide in the woods to get a bit of an ambush? You're actually going to take a few turns first, but you will get less of a reward when you're done. Each one gives you a little bit of a flavor text, a little bit of a choice in the scenario. Some of those will be battles. Most of them, in fact, will be battles, but some of them will be things like adding extra cards to your deck, going on a bit of a training mission, not actually having battles, but just getting more loot or getting more training points, different things that will level up your characters, because this is a game well, leveling up your characters is half the game. At least for myself, it's half the game. You see, each character comes to the table with their own handy-dandy, not even a player aid. This is straight up rules. This is a degree of rules as you learn a character. If you're familiar with any kind of, Zombicide or any of a million game systems where you have different characters you can jump into, and those characters will vary from anything from, literally a few lines of text. Maybe you have to reference, 4 or 5 abilities in the back of a rule book somewhere. Different kinds of ways to differentiate the characters. If you want to play a different character in Too Many Bones, that is a homework assignment. You have to read every little section of the essential information about the character. You have to go through all their dice. You see, they have 16 dice representing different abilities, different ways to level up the characters. Different character paths, branching paths as you go through it, because each of them have different starting points, different ways you can go up that pathway. Maybe you want to get a little bit of that ability and then start going up that tree and then possibly level up this thing and get a few consumables over there that will help you. There's different ways. And then don't forget your default stats, because you also have your health, dexterity, attack, and defense. And those are things you can spend training points on as well. Do you want that new shiny throwing knife that will be able to take an enemy down across the map? Or maybe you just need a few health points because you've been coming dangerously close to losing for the past few turns. Too Many Bones. Every single character offers you a new journey to go down, a new deep dive. As you go through these various days, these various adventures, as you choose different encounters, as you fight baddies or just do whatever, and walk away with more loot, with more training points, ways to build and develop your character. And the reason you're doing all of that is because you're, first of all, fighting people along the way, and the more throwing knives you have, the more health, attack, the more stats, the more Duster levels up her little pet wolf Nightshade. All these things will enhance your ability to survive. They'll enhance your ability to deal damage in both, just solid ways like having extra attack, or fun ways like stabbing somebody and causing them to bleed slowly out across the course of your encounter. And you're doing all of that so you can slowly encounter the various bosses in this game. I have, well, literally shelves full of boxes in this box because, like I said already, I have all the gameplay content for Too Many Bones so far. And each one's a different boss. Each one has a different bit of an end game. And they have different degrees of length to them as well. You see, the game offers you different, well, how long you want to play for. Do you want to sit down and play Too Many Bones for an hour and a half? Do you want to sit down and play Too Many Bones for 4 hours? And you could kind of reset in between as well. You can put it away. A little bit of a process to remember exactly where you're up to, exactly what you're doing, but it's not the hardest to come up with a system. But it gives you a journey, an adventure, a destination, and a big bad to take out at the very end. At least in my experience with the big bads I've played against, they are something else. The big bads offer you a challenge. In fact, one of the complaints I will have about Too Many Bones is going to relate to the fact that there is a drop-off as you go through the adventure and you encounter the baddies and you go scenario after scenario. There will be harder and less hard scenarios. But I usually find getting to that big bad at the end, that's where you really come to find out whether you have leveled up in the right ways, whether you are well suited to taking this person on. Because along the way, every single day that goes by adds to the amount of baddies you're fighting. Too Many Bones takes into account a bit of a battle queue system where you have different encounters, different baddies with levels between 1, 5, and 20 points representing how difficult they are. Or if you have Undertow, there's also 3-point baddies represented as well. We won't get too much into the differences of Undertow. But what happens is, as the games go on, you will be dealing with more and more points worth of baddies. And 4 1s might seem like a challenge, but dealing with a 5 is often a much bigger threat, and dealing with a 20, you don't want to deal with those, and dealing with the endgame boss, make sure you're leveled up properly to deal with them. And then you're going to have this battle mat. This battle mat is where the actual battles take place. This section over here, this glorified mouse pad, is unnecessary in terms of the hill space. It's nice, it's helpful, it's not really that necessary, just to track slowly as you go along the map. And over here we have the actual characters. Those are going to be where you're managing all your stats, where you're leveling up your characters, where you're slotting dice into your active, your locked slots, where you're dealing with the Too Many Bones aspect of the game, where when you roll dice in combat and you fail and you miss, you get what are called bones that can be utilized for your backup plan. So even when you miss, you're still working towards earning something. Those will all slot there. And then of course you have the actual skills you're upgrading and utilizing along the way. And then this is the meat of the actual puzzle, although that's not true. This is the meat of the actual puzzle. But when you're done with this part of it, you go to the actual battle. And the battle's where you start trying to figure out exactly how to utilize those skills and abilities you've been working towards, you've been building up as you play. This is a 4x4 grid, that's all it is. Again, Undertow will add a drop more to it, but a 4x4 grid is all you're dealing with. And you might think that there's not a lot of movement and tactics on a 4x4 grid, and you'd be wrong. I'm not going to beat around the bush, you'd be wrong. This game gives you a ton to do in a very small amount of space. Being able to escape the distance of how far a baddie moves can be as opportune as where you team up, of where you spawn on the board, where you attack, which skills you utilize, how far you move, what you do, how you position yourself. All those things are going to matter extensively. You'll have the order of initiative along the sidebar determining who acts and in what order. And then from there, taking into account the baddies and their abilities are huge. You see, every baddie comes to the table. Every little chip. These are just chips. That's all they are. Too many bones. Every single baddie comes to the table with an amount of health, an initiative aspect, amount of dice they roll, abilities, whether they're melee or ranged, and who they target, what their targeting priorities are. That's all they come to the table with. But each time you draw a new baddie, each time you draw a new chip from the stack to add to the battle mat, it determines a new piece of the puzzle you're trying to navigate. You see, even right here on this board, we have a very scary wolf that has Lashback. Lashback is incredibly threatening, especially for someone who has 6 health. Lashback will deal 2 damage to anyone who attacks them, which is very hard to deal with when you're dealing with a limited pool of life to begin with. Every time you attack that wolf, you're going to take 2 damage back if the wolf survives that attack, which is really not good, and if you're adjacent. So you're trying to figure out, well, I'm playing with Duster and Tantrum. That's 2 adjacent characters over here. I haven't leveled up my throwing dagger, so I don't have that. What and how will I deal with that wolf? Now, the good news is Tantrum does have some throwing axes, so maybe we'll go ahead and notch those down. We'll be able to take the first 2 damage out to a non-adjacent character. So first, Tantrum has to move here in order to attack that person. Then we utilize our throwing axes. Then we're going to go ahead and roll some dice to attack that one over there. Now, fortunately, we've leveled up my attack over here. We have 4 dice, but I can't roll 4 dice because, you see, I use dexterity to move. So my first dexterity goes towards moving. My other dexterity is going to go towards rolling these attack dice, and I roll them, and I get 2 attack, which is unfortunately not enough to take this one out. He does remove 2 of his health. That is helpful. We do get a bones in our backup plan, so it's not all bad news, but he still has 1 health left. Hopefully, he'll roll for being careless. We'll talk about that soon. But now, we have Lashback down to 2. We're going to skip a few sequences here, and maybe Duster is able to take their own die and put it, their targeting die. We'll roll the targeting dice. We will roll the bones. It's not how this is supposed to go. We'll roll this side over here, which gives us this is the Promise of Prey die, which means when we go ahead and use Nightshade, and Nightshade walks along to go ahead and attack, and we roll that, boom, 6 damage in one shot. Now that's even better. I didn't even need the throwing axes, but I couldn't have known that. And because of that, we have that wolf out of play. There are ways you can combine the various things you need. There are ways you can combine the abilities of the characters on the board, the various things you've upgraded. My consumable, my throwing axes, which is one of my favorite parts about Tantrum. Tantrum is a bit of a character to try to actually execute on, because he's a whole lot of glass cannon until you level up his health or defense. He's just a whole lot of attacking and throwing and trying to do, well, throw a tantrum as he goes along and levels up his rage. And then we have this baddie over here who fortunately we took out the wolf, that helped us, but we have another baddie, this one over here with Signal 3. Do you know what Signal 3 means? It means that every single round, they're adding a new 1-point baddie to the battle queue. They're adding more characters that we're going to have to fight next round, which is not fun at all, because just when you're feeling in control, more baddies are teaming up and pouring out from the woodwork to attack you, and you have to balance that. Do we take care of the dangerous wolf first, or do we take care of this guy who only has 1 attack? They're not that much of a threat, but they are calling new people to the table. The sooner we take them out, the better off we'll be. And then finally in that corner, we have that little person over there, Mischief Careless. Let's see if he does roll his 1 bone. He does not. That would have been great for on camera if he had rolled a bone there. You see, he has Careless. If he rolls a bone, he'll actually deal a damage to himself, which would have been the perfect amount to take out that 1 last health remaining. Now, this is the puzzle of too many bones. Every single time, facing off against different amounts of enemies. Dealing with which encounters you choose. Do you take that encounter that's going to add 2 5-point baddies to the top of the battle queue? Because that will give you an extra training point, which will be really helpful for facing off against the boss. But in the here and now, it gives you a far more challenging scenario, a scenario you may or may not come out from alive. That's the core aspect of Too Many Bones. Go through scenarios, deal with baddies, attack baddies, level up your characters, rinse and repeat across X number of scenarios until you deal with the big bad and take them out. That is the puzzle at play. There's a few other things to be mindful of. There's a little game called Dashing Darts or something like that, where you'll be rolling dice back and forth in order to, well, take people out. A little bit of a scenario mini game. You'll have unlocking your trove loot. You see there's going to be regular loot in the game, and then there's trove loot. The regular loot is, good. It gives you what you need. In fact, right now over here I'm holding a multi-tool, which will actually be helpful for dealing with that trove loot. And then we have different trove loot that will require a bit of a lock-picking game to actually unlock it, but will give you generally better effects that can sway the tide of any battle, giving you different options, maybe new backup plans, maybe new abilities, maybe armor or weapons or whatever it is in this game. And that all contributes to one of the best games I've ever played. A game that I really believe if I only could keep one game, it would be a strong contender for it. And so let's talk about why. Let's talk about what I like, why I like it, what I don't like, the complaints, all of that. If you've skipped ahead from all the gameplay overview to over here, well, welcome back. Too Many Bones has one of the most rewarding character systems I've seen in any game. Not one of, it's the most rewarding character system I've seen in any game. Every single character is genuinely its own little asymmetric faction, building off the core building blocks of attacking, of moving, of defense, of all of that. And the different abilities aren't necessarily always that impactful. Maybe this one inflicts poison, that one inflicts bleed, this one will deal 2 extra damage to a non-adjacent enemy. But then they all have different tips and tricks as to how they navigate. We have Duster over here, Duster who's playing around with Nightshade. Nightshade's a little pet wolf, giving her another little addition to the map, an addition she's constantly focusing on. Do I level up my own little skills? She's a bit of an assassin, dealing a lot of damage very quickly, but also being very weak, which is a shame to actually pair up with Tantrum, because the two of them are both similar in that sense. Tantrum doesn't mind being attacked. In fact, it will fuel his rage. His rage is his mechanic that will let him take out baddies, but that's a own little minigame of, as you level up the rage, you try to level up your rage so you can get to the higher levels, and then be able to, one-shot 20-point baddies. That can be incredibly amazing. You get to late game and you one-shot a 20-point baddie. That's insane. And then you can go ahead and level, you can take out a 5-point baddie, a 1-point baddie. There's one-shots available to Tantrum if he triggers his rage far enough and for long enough. But he has to stay alive to do so. He starts with no defense, so that's a little bit of a puzzle. How do you stay alive? You're being mindful of the body count. If you have that consumable, you're going to be, well, you actually always have the consumable, should be on the board over here. Be mindful of the body count. As bodies are piling up the board, as you take them out, you'll be adding to your little body count, being able to convert that into health. He does like preying on the people he's killed along the way. Meanwhile, he's rolling dice to lower his other attack or to raise his own attack. He has different reactions in terms of whether he'll deal bleed back to you when you attack him or possibly just straight up 3 damage. So he really kind of wants to be attacked just so he can explode outwards in a fury of rage in a, well, proverbial tantrum to take people out. Then you'll have Boomer who's crafting bombs in order to throw them at the enemy. You'll have little mechs that you're creating with different characters. Every single character across, I should have taken them out. There's sheets and sheets full of characters. giving you their own little mini game of to how to play the game. Again, utilizing the same core mechanics. But you really have to read different sheets, different rules, different little beginner stat guides. What's your backup plan? What's your innate? What's your innate +1? All these different things, giving you different puzzles as to how you play Too Many Bones. If I want to learn a new game, I could learn a new game, or I could learn a new character in Too Many Bones. There's a ton of depth. There's a ton of variability. It is a new puzzle. You ever get bored of the challenge of what's currently happening? Well, first of all, the amount of games it will take to actually get bored. I mean, I haven't gotten bored of a single character yet. Every time I dive into the game, I try to tackle characters both from, let's say, Duster. Duster's probably one of my most played characters. When I tackle a game with Duster, I usually walk in trying to think through, well, I haven't really gone that path. So let me try that while sticking to a little bit of the familiar. But also, I need to level up my stats. And, I've never really gone high defense in Duster. Maybe I'll go high defense this time. Maybe I'll see if she can really just withstand any attack, still while leveling up her assassin stuff. So she'll both be a threat, but also be high defense. Her attack might be a little lower. Her health might be a little lower. But if I'm rolling 3 or 4 defense every single round, I'm only really at threat of true damage, so I'm probably fine. Maybe I try that. By the way, I haven't actually tried that. Now I kind of want to try that little stat build over there. But that's what I mean. They genuinely have their own little paths of how you can jump into a character time and time again, exploring the new things while going through the old just to keep yourself alive along the way. And if you actually get bored, there's character expansions after expansions. The base game of Too Many Bones comes with, I don't actually know, I think it's 4 characters. Undertow is going to be a slightly more accessible entry point to the series, giving you 2 characters, Duster and Stanza, I believe. And then there's character packs you can add on. And then, of course, there'll be Unbreakable. Unbreakable adding more characters in case you were bored, in case you needed more. And then there's, what's the last one? There's Splice and Dice, giving you a whole new way to tackle bosses as you build up a boss from the ground up. There's 40 Days of Dolor if you want a bit of a campaign. There's the Age of Tyranny. There's the Rage of Tyranny. And what was the new one? 40 Days? I can't remember. There's a new pun of names in Unbreakable. There's so much content for this game, giving you different puzzles as to how you approach it. The character variance is some of the greatest I've seen in any game I've ever played. And the bones mechanic. I love the bones mechanic, the aspect of how you miss in this game, and it just turns into your backup plan, which can be incredibly impactful. Tantrum is slowly whittling down his axes every time I play him. I love his axes. I try to level them up as fast as possible, which is also why I love getting this little skill over here, because it gives me extra dice I can roll to give him my backup plan, just giving me reusable bones, which gets me to my axe collector stat faster, so I can keep chucking axes across the board, trying to stay out of the line of danger of people like that wolf who has lashback, or some of the creatures who will inflict poison when you attack them with secrete. There's all kinds of skills and abilities to navigate around this puzzle. And that puzzle is the heart of the game, past the skill and character creation again. The heart of the game. Even just today I was playing it again because I wanted to dive back into this. And just today I was faced off. That's actually one of my first 3-player games. My first 3-player game. I played this game 1 and 2 players. Today was my first 3-player game as we went through this. And we had a scenario where we literally looked at the board and we're like, well, we're going to lose this map. We're done. It's over. We're going to lose this particular map because there's no way we can survive. We had done one of those things where we took on a more challenging battle in order to get that extra training point. But it turns out those 2 5-point baddies layered on top of the battle queue were too much for us. We were down to nothing. We had no way of actually escaping. We had one character dead. We had Duster, Nightshade, and Tantrum available with like 1 health, 2 health each, and then just way too many 5-point baddies. But we survived. We won. Because amongst all that, we saw the puzzle. We saw what we can do to actually win. Combine that with a few lucky rolls, a few well-placed hits, a little bit of navigation and turn order manipulation, and we had the game. And those are some of my favorite moments of Too Many Bones, where I think we're dead, where I think it's over, where I think the die has been cast and it's time to return back to another scenario, although this time the clock has moved along, the baddies are worse, and we haven't even leveled up along the way to suit them. The games are going to get harder as you go through each loss, and so each loss feels that much more painful. You need to level up to defeat the big bad, but a few losses can destroy the entire sequence for you. But then we won. We saw the puzzle. We figured it out. There's a ton going on in this game. There's a ton to try to dive into. Every single one of these stacks full of baddies, and there's more in this box, and there'll be more in Unbreakable. They all give you different abilities, different puzzles to figure out. Do you deal with Signal? Do you deal with Mischief? Mischief will take out your defense dice. They'll take out any active dice you have placed. Mischief is a problem. You need to deal with it. But you also need to deal with Signal. You also need to deal with Poison. You also need to deal with Flight. You also need to deal with any single threat that these monsters present. There's a ton of puzzle on this board, knowing what to attack, how to attack it, in what order to attack it, and then ideally rolling the perfect dice also helps along the way. There's a ton of strategy in Too Many Bones. I love the puzzle it gives. Now, as far as what I didn't like in the game, there are a few things, and the first one is going to be heavily caveated, which is I found Too Many Bones to be one of the worst rulebook experiences I've ever had being introduced to a game. Now, first of all, I will caveat that strongly with the fact that my entry point to Too Many Bones was this one over here. We have Too Many Bones Undertow, version 1.0 on the rulebook. And I'm heavily pointing that out because the rulebook has constantly been iterated. This is Undertow's 1.0. We have Too Many Bones 1.03. And I know that they're up to like 2 point something. I don't know. The rulebook has been iterated over the years, and I believe it's better. The last time I looked through one of the new rulebooks online, it seems to be structured better. So I will say I don't know exactly how hard it is to jump into Too Many Bones from the new rulebook versus an old. What I can tell you is my experience was bad enough that I almost gave up on this game entirely, and I'm so glad I didn't. But then having read through the new rulebooks, it seems like it's better, but I'm also biased by knowing the game, so I'm not certain if it is or isn't, although the information is all there. I find in general, Too Many Bones, both in the rulebook and on these sheets that you're constantly referencing, tends to be a little light on the amount of explanation they can go through, and they tend to focus on like one-word sentences that make perfect sense if you know what's going on, but aren't always enough information if you don't. Again, even some of the abilities on these sheets, even some of the character skill terms on all these stuff over here, they tend to be a little light on text, which is great. It's great as a reminder, but it's not always great when it's the first time you're looking at a skill, when it's the first time you're trying to learn how to play, and you're like, I could have used a full paragraph where you only put 2 sentences. So again, caveated with the fact that my introduction was Undertow 1.0. That was my introduction to the system, so that's the grain of salt you should take, but it was not a pleasant dive into this world. Secondly, I'd love an insert. Would really love an insert. They have this over here, but let me finish the sentence. I don't mean I'd love an insert. We have this. I'd love an insert that would in some way manage packing up and storing game to game. If you're in the middle of a game, if you're in the middle of your scenarios, and you're trying to figure out, well, I want to keep playing, but I have to track and remember where I'm up to, and I have to put everything back, and I could kind of do it. It's a little bit of a pain to try to remember exactly where you're up to. I don't think it would be the hardest, granted someone has to do it, but I don't think it would be the hardest to come up with some sort of system, a save system for Too Many Bones, a system where you could say, okay, we're taking our mats, we're putting them into this little container, those go into a little separate shelf somewhere. It doesn't have to fit back in here, I don't expect it to. But give me some sort of save system, because the games, especially the harder bosses, the longer bosses, not harder bosses, can be 3-hour plus experiences, 4-hour plus experiences as you go through it. Especially if you're someone who cares about every single move and you try to think through every single interaction and every single skill you level up. I'd love a save system in this game to not always be choosing. For myself, I always choose a shorter or medium length boss. I don't think I've ever tackled one of the longer bosses because I don't love dealing with putting it off to the side. I've done it, but I don't love dealing with that. I'd love to see something like that. My biggest complaint, though, because those are more accessibility issues, my biggest complaint is the difficulty ramp up when you hit a boss. Because at least for myself, I found that when I go through this game, I generally can tackle the bosses and survive. It usually feels like a fight. Almost always. The first intro scenario is not so much, but when I try to choose those harder options, and the game does have difficulty scaling in terms of the way you can jump into it, but even at the hard or the normal difficulty, where you don't start with any extra stats, I do find that I can manage most fights. They feel close, but I'm manageable. And then I hit a boss, and then I just get slapped in the face. My first experience with almost every single boss is being completely walloped by whatever that boss is throwing at me. The puzzle just seems to be too challenging. The way the game presents these bosses, it really is a challenge. And I don't mind a challenge, but it feels a little bit off to have manageable slapped in the face. Now, manageable does not always mean I win. I lose the scenarios here and there. I have dice not going my way. I have times where I bite off a little more than I can chew. And even just today, like I said, that scenario, I could have lost it just as easily. But I find there is a large ramp up that can be me going through, 2 hours of gameplay that are really, really feels well balanced against every moment counting, but me still managing to make it through, and then just being shoved off the edge of a cliff. So I don't have an easy solution there. I still love the game despite it, but it feels a little bit like, okay, great, now time to start again. And you don't have to start again, by the way. You can lose against the boss and then continue to the next day, at least until you get to your maximum day count. So you do have multiple opportunities to dive in, which is often helpful. You might get hit, but now you know a little bit more about exactly how you want to tackle it. But then again, there's also more baddie points in the queue, so it's a little bit of a puzzle or a challenge there. As far as what I can see others not liking, along with what I said, this game has a very much a rich get richer, poor get poorer vibe. Now, it is a cooperative or solo experience. It's not competitive. But at the same time, if you do well scenario to scenario to scenario, the game will reward you for doing well, and you'll continue to be able to survive and win and win. lose your first 2 battles, and you'll have a harder time dealing with the next battle because you haven't been leveling up the way you should have, and the baddie points keep escalating every time the clock ticks on. And so that is something that it can be frustrating. If you find the difficulty scaling isn't working for you, losing is not something that you can afford to do too much or too often and still expect to have a chance at all as the game progresses. Now, like I said already, there is difficulty scaling in the sense that you can adjust the difficulty, give yourself starting off stats for the game, things that will help the experience manage. For myself, Too Many Bones thrives not when I lose, but when I feel like I could lose but manage to persevere past it. Past that, the art style. This is not a problem for me at all. I happen to love the art style. I find it very unique. But it's one of those games where I see a lot of people complaining how they just can't get into it. And if you really can't, you really can't. It is what it is. But I highly recommend this game. I highly recommend giving it a shot when you can, getting past that art style. It is unique. It is different, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. For me, it's a good thing. For you, it might not be. But it is something that I know people have complained about a bit. But otherwise, it also needs multiple reference sheets. I picked these up already before, but we have our full duster sheet over here. That's one. This is a 2-player game, me two-handing it solo. We have Tantrum over here. We have our general character progression plus some skills and whatnot. Then we have all these skills over here. You generally need 4 sheets minimum. Just if you're playing 2 characters solo, you need 4 sheets that are often going to be just stacked up like this because you don't have the table space to lay them all out. You're frequently going to be doing this a lot. Okay, great. Okay. Undead. The first time this unit is defeated, you're going to be reading all these skills with these multiple reference sheets that can be frustrating. Now, the more you play it, the more you won't have to pick it up for every single skill. You know what signal means, you know what secrete is, you know what poison is, you know what bleed does, you know what all these things do, you know what flight is, you know what dive is, but I still get faced with skills that I haven't seen enough or just don't remember what they do, or I need to check exact precision. Okay, I know dive is going to move them across the map, but when exactly does it trigger? Does it trigger when they're in flight or just anytime? You often need to check those little details to find out exactly what a skill does. There's multiple reference sheets that you'll constantly be checking that do or can slow down the experience or take you out of the immersion if you're not into that. And then there's chips instead of miniatures. We have all these chips instead of a miniature game, and I love miniatures. And one of the problems I had with Too Many Bones when it was first presented to me was this giantly massive, not overpriced, but expensive game that didn't even give me miniatures. Now, I've grown to love the system, but it certainly can be something that might put others off. And lastly, is going to be in that category as well, is the price point. This is not a cheap game. This is straight up not a cheap game. Your cheapest level of entry to this game will likely be Undertow, which is roughly a $90 experience. And I think Undertow is amazing. I recommend Undertow. I do. It's what pulled me in. But at the same time, it only gives you 2 characters, so you kind of want more characters. And I also think that it adds a drop more complexity to the Too Many Bones experience in terms of giving you like a few extra things to manage, which aren't a lot, but if it's your first experience, I think Too Many Bones Pure and Simple is a little better as far as an entry point. So maybe you get Too Many Bones the base game, but now you're looking at already more money. And if you want to go all in, if you want to get everything, you're looking, Unbreakable, if Too Many Bones Unbreakable, the campaign they have on GameFound, the gameplay all in will be roughly $670 or something like that. And then the all in, giving you the trove chest, every promo, every single thing, upgraded health chips that you don't need, but they are nice. It's going to be $1,100. That is an obscene amount of money to spend on any single game unless it genuinely is the only game in your collection. You don't need it all, and it might be a problem for you. The good news is I don't think you actually need it all. Unless and until you're really diving into this game a lot, I think that getting the Too Many Bones base game or Undertow plus a character expansion pack, I think that's going to be a ton of content that will keep you happy for a very long time. And if you find that you like this game enough that you need to upgrade, it will be because you recognize that it's worth upgrading. You'll recognize that it's worth having roughly $600 worth of content on a table in front of you for an amazing, incredible experience, which brings me to final thoughts on this game. Too Many Bones is a 5 out of 5 for me. It should be very clear and obvious from the way I've been talking this entire time. This is one of my favorite games. I don't know exactly where I ranked it last year, but I will say every time I play it, I enjoy it more. Every time I try a new character, I appreciate what they did even more. Every time I dive into a new boss, a new set of miniatures, a new journey of any kind, I see more variants, more challenges, more things to think about and face off with as I play this game. It consistently rises in the ranks every time I play it. And like I said at the beginning of this video, I don't know for sure if this would be the only game I kept if I could only keep one game. But I can tell you for sure it would be a strong contender. I can tell you for sure that it would be lining up against 3 or 4 other games as I wrestled with which one makes the cut, and whatever one gets left off, I'd be sad about. Too Many Bones is amazing. it's worth the entry point. It's worth the price of admission. Give it a shot and see if it's for you. The good news, if it's not for you, you can absolutely sell it off to somebody else. It's a game that holds its value just fine. Not something I talk about a lot in reviews, but this is a game that's expensive, and so I think it's worth covering that. It's a game that if it's not for you, you can get back most, if not all, of your money. But more likely than not, you'll find that the real problem isn't whether you wasted that first $150. The real problem is that you're going to want to get more, because you'll find out just how much fun this game is. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.